When 82-year-old Daniel Murphy tried to walk across the Family Feud stage, his trembling hands and unsteady gait told a story of Parkinson's disease, slowly stealing away the grace of a man who had spent 60 years teaching others to dance. But what happened when his granddaughter Emma answered, "Dancing with someone you love would turn a television studio into a ballroom and remind everyone watching what it truly means to fight for one more moment of beauty." Daniel moved with careful deliberation, each step a conscious effort to maintain the dignity that had defined him throughout his career as one of Cleveland's most beloved dance instructors. His hands shook with the characteristic tremor of Parkinson's, and his once fluid movements had become rigid and calculated. But in his eyes there was still the spark of a man who had lived his life in rhythm, who had taught thousands of students that dancing wasn't just about movement, it was about expressing the music that lives in every human heart. Beside him walked 16-year-old Emma Murphy, his granddaughter, who had inherited not just his love of dance, but his determination to find beauty even in life's most challenging moments. Emma had been Daniel's dance partner since she was 3 years old, learning her first steps in his studio, growing up to the sound of big band music and the gentle guidance of a grandfather who believed that everyone could dance if they just found their rhythm. The Murphy family had made the journey from Cleveland to Atlanta, not for the prize money, though they certainly needed it for Daniel's mounting medical expenses, but because Emma had a dream. She wanted to dance with her grandfather one more time on a stage where the whole world could see. One more time before Parkinson's took away his ability to move to music altogether. The family included Daniel's daughter, Patricia, 54, a nurse who had dedicated herself to caring for her father as his condition progressed. Her husband, Thomas, 56, a retired factory worker who had learned to see Daniel not as his wife's difficult father but as a man fighting with dignity against an unforgiving disease. And Emma, who had become Daniel's primary motivation to keep fighting, to keep moving, to keep finding reasons to get out of bed each morning. Daniel had been diagnosed with Parkinson's 3 years earlier, just 6 months after retiring from teaching dance. The irony was cruel. The man who had spent his life helping others find grace and rhythm was now struggling with basic motor control. His speech had become slurred, his handwriting illegible, his famous smooth dance moves replaced by jerky, unpredictable movements. But Emma had refused to let the disease define their relationship. Every Sunday she would visit her grandfather and insist they dance together in his living room. Even when his movements were stiff and his balance unreliable, she would put on Glenn Miller or Frank Sinatra, take his trembling hands in hers, and move with him to whatever rhythm his body could manage. "Grandpa," she would say during these sessions, "we're not dancing despite the Parkinson's, we're dancing through it." The decision to apply for Family Feud had been Emma's idea, born from her observation that her grandfather's symptoms seemed to improve when he was focused on music and movement. She had read about how rhythm and dance could help Parkinson's patients, and she wanted to give him one last moment of glory on a stage where his lifelong passion could be celebrated rather than pitied. Steve Harvey had been briefed about Daniel's condition during rehearsal, but seeing the elderly man navigate the stage with such obvious difficulty was still heartbreaking. During the family introductions, Steve had approached Daniel with the respect due to someone who had clearly lived a full and meaningful life. "Mr. Murphy," Steve had said gently, "tell us about yourself. What did you do before you retired?" "I taught dance," Daniel had replied, his voice shaky but clear. 60 years. Started when I was 22, right after I got back from Korea. Taught everyone from wedding couples to Broadway hopefuls. 60 years, Steve had exclaimed, and the audience had burst into appreciative applause. "That's a lifetime of helping people find their rhythm." Daniel had smiled, and for a moment his tremor had seemed to subside. "Dance isn't just about steps," he had said with surprising strength. "It's about finding the music in your heart and letting your body follow." Emma had stepped forward then, taking her grandfather's arm with practiced ease. "Steve," she had said, "Grandpa taught me that dancing is like love. It's not about being perfect, it's about being present with someone special." The game had progressed through 3 rounds, with the Murphy family holding their own against the Rodriguez family from Texas. Daniel had contributed thoughtful answers when asked, his decades of experience with people and music giving him insights that earned solid spots on the board. When asked to name something that brings people together, he had confidently answered, music, earning the number 2 answer, and proud smiles from his family. But it was during the 4th round that everything changed. The question seemed perfect for their family. Name something that never gets old. The Rodriguez family had just failed to control the board, and it was the Murphy family's opportunity to steal. Patricia had given the first answer, love, which had earned a respectable spot. Thomas had followed with family traditions, another solid response. Now it was Emma's turn, but as she stepped forward to the podium, she glanced back at her grandfather, who was struggling to maintain his balance even while seated. The tremor in his hands had worsened under the stress of the studio lights and crowd noise, and she could see the frustration in his eyes, frustration at his body's betrayal at the disease that was stealing away the physical expression of everything he had lived for. When Emma spoke, her voice carried across the studio with a conviction that made everyone listen. Dancing with someone you love. The words hung in the air with a weight that went far beyond a survey answer. The audience fell quiet, sensing that this response came from a place of deep personal meaning, but they couldn't yet understand the full significance of what Emma had just said. Steve's expression changed as he processed her answer, something about the way she had said it, the glance she had given her grandfather, the careful emphasis on someone you love, told him this wasn't just a game show response. Emma, Steve said gently, setting down his cards. That's a beautiful answer. Tell me, do you like to dance? I love to dance, Emma replied, her voice beginning to crack with emotion. My grandfather taught me everything I know about dancing. We've been dancing together since I was 3 years old. Steve looked over at Daniel, seeing him with new understanding. This wasn't just an elderly man struggling with Parkinson's. This was a dance instructor, someone who had built his life around movement and music, now trapped in a body that could no longer obey his artistic impulses. Mr. Murphy, Steve said, approaching Daniel with newfound respect, you taught your granddaughter to dance. Daniel nodded, struggling to speak clearly. Every Sunday, we still dance, in my living room, even though he couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Everyone in the studio understood what he was trying to say. Emma stepped closer to her grandfather, taking his trembling hand in hers. Steve, she said, tears beginning to flow, Grandpa has Parkinson's disease. The doctors say he probably won't be able to dance much longer. I just wanted to dance with him one more time somewhere special, somewhere where people could see how beautiful it is when 2 people move together, even when it's not perfect. The studio fell completely silent. This wasn't the polite quiet of people waiting for a game show reveal, but the profound silence of individuals who had just realized they were witnessing something much more important than entertainment. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes, had seen every possible family dynamic, had witnessed countless emotional moments. But something about this grandfather and granddaughter, their obvious love for each other, the dignity with which Daniel was facing his illness, Emma's determination to honor their shared passion, moved him in ways he hadn't expected. Emma, Steve said softly, would you like to dance with your grandfather right now? Emma's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Here, on the stage? Right here, right now, Steve confirmed. If your grandfather is up for it. Daniel's face lit up with an expression of joy that seemed to push back against the effects of his disease. I'd like that very much, he managed to say. Steve turned to the production booth. Can we get some music in here? Something slow and beautiful? Within moments, the opening notes of The Way You Look Tonight began to fill the studio. The same song Daniel had danced to with his late wife on their wedding day. The same song he had taught to countless couples over the decades. Emma helped her grandfather to his feet, and something remarkable happened. As the music began, as Emma took his hands and guided him into a basic slow dance position, Daniel's tremor seemed to subside. The rhythm of the music appeared to override the neurological chaos of Parkinson's, allowing him to access movement patterns that had been ingrained over 60 years of teaching. They began to move together, not with the fluid grace of professional dancers, but with something more beautiful, the unmistakable connection between two people who loved each other completely. Emma matched her grandfather's unsteady rhythm, following his lead even when his movements were unpredictable, creating a dance that was imperfect but absolutely genuine. The audience watched in stunned silence as this 82-year-old man with Parkinson's disease and his 16-year-old granddaughter transformed the Family Feud stage into a ballroom. Some people in the audience were crying openly. Others were smiling with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing pure love in action. Steve Harvey stood to the side, watching this extraordinary moment unfold, understanding that he was seeing something that transcended television, something that would stay with everyone in that studio for the rest of their lives. As the song continued, Daniel began to speak softly to Emma, his voice carrying the authority of a lifetime spent teaching dance. "Remember, sweetheart, it's not about the steps, it's about feeling the music, feeling each other." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her movements remained strong and supportive. She was dancing not just with her grandfather, but for him, helping him express through movement what his disease was trying to steal away. "That's it, Grandpa," she whispered back. "Feel the music. We're dancing through it, remember? We're dancing through everything." The song reached its crescendo, and Daniel, summoning strength from somewhere deep within himself, attempted a simple spin with Emma. His movements were shaky, but the gesture was unmistakably that of a dance instructor showing off his most prized student. When the music ended, grandfather and granddaughter stood together in the center of the stage, holding each other tight. The studio erupted in the longest, most sustained applause Steve had ever heard on Family Feud. Not the manufactured enthusiasm of a game show audience, but the genuine appreciation of people who had just witnessed something sacred. But Steve wasn't finished. He approached Daniel and Emma, reaching into his jacket pocket to pull out his most prized possession, a vintage gold watch that had belonged to his own grandfather, a watch he wore to every important event, every significant moment in his career. "Mr. Murphy," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to have this. It's my grandfather's watch, and I've carried it with me for 20 years. But today, I learned something about time from watching you and Emma dance." He placed the watch gently in Daniel's trembling hands. "Time doesn't stop for anyone or anything. But love can make time stand still. And for 3 minutes and 27 seconds, you two made time stop for everyone in the studio." Daniel looked down at the watch, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Steve," he managed to say, "I can't, this is too much." "No, sir," Steve replied firmly. "This is exactly enough. You've spent 60 years giving people the gift of dance, the gift of movement, the gift of expressing love through rhythm. You've earned this." He turned to Emma. "And you, young lady, have shown everyone here what it means to honor someone you love. You didn't just dance with your grandfather, you danced for everyone who has ever loved someone facing illness, everyone who has ever wanted one more moment, one more dance, one more chance to show what's in their heart." Steve addressed the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone here to understand what we just witnessed. This wasn't just a dance, this was a masterclass in love, in dignity, in finding beauty even when life gets difficult." The applause continued, but now it was joined by something else, a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, the kind of recognition usually reserved for the greatest performances on the most prestigious stages. As the cameras stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something remarkable happened. Person after person approached Daniel and Emma, not to express pity or sympathy, but to thank them. Elderly couples shared their own stories of dancing through difficult times. Parents talked about the importance of creating memories with grandparents. Young people gained new appreciation for the wisdom and grace that comes with age. One elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes. "I haven't danced with my husband in 10 years because he's embarrassed about his arthritis," she told Daniel. "But watching you tonight, seeing how beautiful it was when you danced anyway. We're going to dance when I get home. Thank you for showing us that love is more important than perfect steps. 6 months later, the episode aired exactly as it happened, with no editing to minimize the emotional weight of the dance or Steve's unprecedented gesture. The response was unlike anything in Family Feud history. Dance studios across the country began offering special classes for people with movement disorders. Parkinson's support groups shared the clip as inspiration for patients and families. But perhaps most importantly, the episode reminded viewers that dignity and beauty don't disappear with illness, they just take different forms. Daniel Murphy continued dancing with Emma every Sunday for 8 more months before Parkinson's made movement too difficult. But he kept Steve's watch on his nightstand, a reminder of the day when time stood still and the whole world watched him dance one more time with the granddaughter, who had inherited not just his love of movement, but his understanding that love finds a way to express itself, even when everything else fails. Emma went on to study dance therapy, inspired by the healing power she had witnessed in her grandfather's response to music and movement. She specialized in working with elderly patients and their families, helping them find ways to maintain connection and dignity even as physical abilities declined. Steve Harvey said in later interviews that watching Daniel and Emma dance changed his understanding of courage and grace. "I thought I knew what strength looked like," he said. But watching that man dance with Parkinson's, watching his granddaughter honor their tradition even though everything was different, that taught me that real strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about dancing anyway, loving anyway, showing up anyway. The watch became a symbol not just of time's passage, but of time's suspension. Those miraculous moments when love creates something so beautiful that everything else stops to witness it. Daniel wore it every day until he passed away peacefully in his sleep, 2 years later, surrounded by family with Glenn Miller playing softly in the background. At his funeral, Emma performed one final dance in his honor, not a perfect, polished performance, but a heartfelt tribute that included all the wobbles, all the uncertainties, all the imperfect grace that had characterized their last dance together, because she had learned from her grandfather that the most beautiful dances aren't about technical perfection. They're about two hearts moving together to the same rhythm, for as long as the music lasts. The lesson that day wasn't about Parkinson's disease or the inevitability of aging. It was about the power of love to transcend physical limitations, the importance of honoring relationships while we still can, and the truth that some of life's most beautiful moments happen not despite our imperfections, but because of our willingness to be imperfect together, in rhythm, in love, in the precious time we have been given.